Professional sports teams are sort of trivial in the large scheme of things, but they are an important part of a city's identity, something that brings people together across the usual socioeconomic divides, and they're usually an important part of a city's urban fabric, for better or worse. Well, today we're going to look at the 10 North American metro areas that do the best job integrating stadiums and arenas into the urban environment, and some extremely bad ones too, so stay tuned. This is CityNerd, weekly content on cities and transportation, like quarterly content on sports. Viewer-suggested topics, always welcome, particularly when they come from a former MLS Rookie of the Year. Mr. Akindele tweets, "People like @PushTheNeedle and @NerdForCities have graded individual stadiums. Would be cool to see them grade entire cities based on their sports stadiums." And I did make the mistake of responding, apparently, so now I have to follow through. Okay, so I make no apology for being a sports enjoyer. Like, I am absolutely glued to the TV for the NBA playoffs every night right now. And I have done a few of these videos on arenas, stadiums, and ballparks, but my thinking on this stuff does continue to evolve. I'm not going to go into a long-winded argument for why sports are important to think about, even if you personally are not a fan. I've talked about that in other videos. But today's video is a bit more holistic. It's about how a city or a metropolitan area approaches stadium and arena siting. You could say the choice on where to put a stadium says something about how a metropolitan area values urbanism. Is a big event something everyone should drive out to the suburbs for, or do we want it to be something woven into the city that brings people together? It's actually a tricky question when it comes to 70 or 80,000 seat NFL stadiums that might sit dormant like 350 days a year, but it's a lot more straightforward with ballparks and arenas. The best ballparks have always been integrated into urban neighborhoods, and arenas are almost always multi-purpose by definition. I mean, where else are you going to put bands when they come through town, or Disney ice skating extravaganzas, or monster truck rallies, or animatronic dinosaurs? Football stadiums are tougher though. In the 70s, we had the idea of building circular multi-purpose stadiums to host both football and baseball. They were kind of like the Strode of sports venues. They didn't really work well for either sport. I think the only one that hasn't been demolished yet is the old Alameda County Coliseum, which Oakland was still shoehorning football and baseball into pretty recently. Not sure it's really working out though. Okay, so I revisited the ratings for all the venues and then I averaged them across their respective metro areas. And I did give bonus points for co-tenancy. I mean, football and soccer should be a no-brainer. Atlanta United and the Falcons share a stadium. That's just being efficient. The Nuggets and the Avs share an arena. That's good. The Yankees and New York City Football Club share a stadium. Okay, I can't really abide that, but I still gave bonus points. The threshold for making this list was I wanted cities that had teams in at least 3 of what I think of as the 5 major sports. And I am lumping CFL in with American football. So this is going to include a lot of US and Canadian cities, but no Mexican ones. The criteria, it's similar to what you've seen before on this channel. It's mostly about being woven into the urban fabric, compact venues, minimal parking footprint, active street frontage, multimodal connections. It'll all make sense as we go through, so we'll just get into it. And number 10 was just about the toughest one to grade. It is New York. It is the largest metro area we're looking at by a pretty healthy margin. And it has the most teams. I mean, you've got suburban Long Island, which is and you've got average to excellent venues serving all 5 boroughs. Manhattan, the Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, and New Jersey, which is pretty solid for NHL and MLS. MetLife is a shared venue, but I don't know, it's kind of an E or F tier for me. Number 9 is Minneapolis-St. Paul. I do give the Twin Cities a lot of credit for locating every single one of their venues centrally, all accessible from the rail system. If you go way back to my NFL Stadium Transit Connections video, I did have US Bank number 1, but I don't love it as much as an integrated piece of the downtown fabric. This is kind of true across just about all of the Twin Cities venues. There's just not a ton of active street frontage, but then this is a metro area that builds a lot of its pedestrian infrastructure one story up. Also, there isn't a single shared venue. You couldn't have the Timberwolves and the Wild in the same building, or the Vikings and the Loons, or just the Golden Gophers for that matter. I didn't even look at college football stadiums. Still though, all things considered, the Twin Cities got it basically right. Number 8 is Boston. This one was tough. Fenway is absolutely an S-tier ballpark. I've got TD Garden as an S-tier arena, and it does host both the Celtics and the Bruins, but my goodness, Gillette Stadium just drives me absolutely crazy. I understand it's home to 2 teams that call themselves New England, but did they really have to take it literally and put the stadium halfway between Boston and Providence? It's like if you took all the franchises that are called Minnesota, which they all are, and put them halfway between Minneapolis and like Duluth. What are we even doing here? Anyway, Gillette just kills Boston's ranking on this list. Number 7 is Detroit. Look, Detroit rarely makes one of my lists, but the city gets an A for central placement. Recognize that the Lions used to play at the Silverdome in Pontiac, 20 miles from downtown. The Pistons used to play at the Palace of Auburn Hills, 20 miles from downtown. So Ford Field and Comerica Park aren't great pieces of downtown architecture, but points for bringing people into the heart of the city. And I do really like Little Caesars Arena, which I think is A tier and now hosts both the Pistons and the Red Wings. Number 6, Montreal. Bell Center is an A tier arena for me. I mean, it's got a bit of a Madison Square Garden vibe with skyscrapers practically on top of it and trains underneath. But I do like Saputo Stadium, which I talked about in the MLS video. And I haven't looked at CFL before, but the Alouettes play in Molson Memorial Stadium, which is kind of similarly woven into an urban neighborhood, a bit away from downtown, which I think is good, and it's well connected by other modes. Let's stay north for number 5. Okay, Toronto viewers, I know I'm gonna hear some opinions on this placement, so don't hold back. Rogers Centre is an A for me. I think I had it ranked 5th in my ballparks video. Scotiabank Arena is solidly above average, and bonus points for co-locating the Raptors and the hapless Maple Leafs. BMO Field, bit of a parking crater, kind of average for MLS, but again, bonus points for co-locating the CFL Argonauts. All the venues are pretty accessible and central without being too disruptive of the city's fabric. Number 4 is St. Louis. I do love that we're going all over the continent for this. St. Louis is a baseball town, and New Busch Stadium is a pretty strong ballpark from an urbanism perspective. Mostly active frontage and good light rail access. Enterprise Center, where the Blues play, is B tier for me. Not the greatest surrounding land uses, but I like the design okay, and it is close in and accessible. And finally, City Park, which was not open for business when I did my MLS video, but it is now. I think the location in West Downtown is phenomenal. It's extremely accessible and just fits the neighborhood beautifully. Maybe S tier. This is as close to a European type soccer stadium as we probably have in MLS. Okay, I am gonna get to the top 3. And some dishonorable mentions, but first, brief reminder to engage all of the available website functions. Consider following on the various apps if you're a glutton for punishment. And consider checking out the Patreon if you're just hell-bent on supporting the channel directly. Also, okay, so if you follow this channel, you probably already know it's just me. I research, write, and put together everything you see each week, and that's kind of the way I like it. This isn't a podcast. I don't interview people. I'm not a journalist. But sometimes you do have to make an exception and get out of your comfort zone and experiment a little bit if you want to broaden your own understanding. So that's what I did. I'm not really going to say more about it, but the title and this clip are probably going to tell you all you need to know.
And to me, that is the major issue, is this idea that when bad things happen to people who are vulnerable, they're just being justly punished.
Yeah, it's a personal failing, right?
Yeah, and they're just being punished for existing in places where I have to look at them. Like, how dare, right?
Right.
You know?
Yeah. And it's so strange. I mean, we all have...
Needless to say, it's a very different format for me, to the point where it just doesn't really fit on my regular channel. So I've put it up on my streaming service, Nebula, as a Nebula Plus. And this is kind of the point. Nebula lets me experiment with maybe like more sensitive subject matter in a way that, well, let's just say might not be that compatible with my usual platform. You see, the algorithm is powerful and it's really helped grow this channel, but it also kind of incentivizes you to be a bit risk averse. So what I would say to you is, subscribing to Nebula not only supports me directly because it is creator owned and I have a direct stake in the platform, but it's an outlet that supports me creatively and won't penalize me for experimenting and trying to grow. I don't want this to appear completely self-serving, so I do want to point out that there is all kinds of other great exclusive content on Nebula. There are great originals like Lindsay Ellis's brand new Everyone Loves Guy Fieri Now, which is very much up my alley as a connoisseur of American fine dining. And I do personally get a lot of value out of the classes, which you can't find anywhere else, like Low Spec Gamer's class about how to use budget effectively. It's all very useful if you're an aspiring creator, or even if you're a quasi-established creator who's still learning the ropes. But honestly, the classes are also very fun if you just want to nerd out on what happens behind the scenes of some of these great channels. Anyway, if you use the link down in the description to subscribe, you're gonna get like 40% off, and it's gonna come out to like $2.50 a month. You'll get all my usual weekly videos ad-free and all kinds of other great content. And you'll be helping support my channel financially and creatively. And if you're already subscribed on Nebula, well, you should be watching this there, but thank you. A couple honorable mentions. Chicago is notable by its absence from the top 10, especially given that it has an S-tier ballpark, but it also has like an E-tier ballpark in my opinion. And the United Center is just pretty awful. Soldier Field is above average, at least for as long as it sticks around, but it all wasn't enough to get it above number 12 on my list. And I have Charlotte at number 11. In some ways, it's the best since all the venues are right downtown, even the minor league ballpark. But I just don't know how I feel about an NFL stadium taking up this much prime acreage in the central city. On the plus side, the Panthers do share Bank of America Stadium with Charlotte FC, but not the NWSL North Carolina Courage. And the Hornets don't share the Spectrum Center with the NHL Carolina Hurricanes because the Courage and the Hurricanes play in Raleigh. It's not a criticism, it's just interesting. Dishonorable mentions, I didn't even know how to evaluate San Francisco. Oracle Park and Chase Center are pretty high level for me, but the quote-unquote San Francisco football team plays in a completely different metro area, like 40 miles away. Grounds for disqualification. And there are cities that do this worse than Philadelphia, but those cities are in Florida and Texas. You just expect better from Philly. Yeah, the major venues are sort of clustered together and accessible by rail, but I mean, just look at it. I guess the silver lining here is I now have enough subscribers to fill Lincoln Financial Field, Citizens Bank Park, Wells Fargo Center, and Subaru Park all at the same time. Let's go to number 3, Washington, D.C., home of forbidden aerial imagery. Capital One Arena, shared by the Bullets and the Caps, is still my top arena in North America. Audi Field is very high level as well, and Nationals Park is above average. DC would actually be a strong contender for number 1 on this whole list, but FedEx Field just really kills it. Way out in the Maryland suburbs with a huge parking moat and just nowhere near transit. Number 2, Seattle. The stadium area is basically like reclaimed brownfield that's walkable from downtown and pretty well served by transit. So it strikes that nice balance of being central without wasting the most valuable real estate. Lumen is shared by the Hawks and the Sounders, and the OL Reign actually. T-Mobile Park leverages the same advantages and stays pretty compact. And then Climate Pledge Arena was not open when I did my arenas video. I kind of love that this building's been renovated like 5 times since it opened in 1962. Although I didn't give extra credit for that, but I do love that it leverages a walkable inner neighborhood, Lower Queen Anne. You just gotta build that Ballard Link extension to get Seattle to number 1. But that spot belongs to Vancouver, BC, so bow down to your Cascadian urbanist overlords. Pound for pound, Vancouver is just the best city on the continent, in my opinion. The only thing Vancouver doesn't do right is actually being affordable. I mean, I wish the prevailing price for a dwelling unit here was like $200,000. But alas, we can't all be Tulsa, Oklahoma. I joke, but it is a problem. Anyway, BC Place was my number 1 MLS stadium. It is shared with the CFL Lions, and Rogers Arena, home of the Canucks, is right there as well. Rogers once also housed the NBA expansion Grizzlies. Man, I love when a team relocates and just keeps a completely inappropriate nickname. Like, there was once a point where Utah was the Jazz and New Orleans was the Hornets. Just bizarro world stuff. Okay, that's all I got. Thanks for joining and indulging my irrational enthusiasm for professional team sports. There's all kinds of room to quibble with this list, so bring it on. Thanks to the patrons for your continued support. In the next few weeks, you might actually see some upgrades to my studio setup and probably some of my gear once I settle into a home base, and the direct support is really gonna help with those improvements. I'm just not quite settled yet. Anyway, keep the great topic suggestions coming, especially if you're a cool, famous athlete. I will be back with a new episode next week, and I'll see you then. Is it MLS or the MLS?